So welcome to today's Coffee With, and today it's with Professor Jim Heckman from University of Chicago. So Professor Heckman received a Nobel Prize in the early 2000s for his work mostly on teasing out causal effects and differentiating that from selection effects. And he's still doing that type of work, but also these days doing a lot of work on child development, and recently, as his keynote today, on what is different between Scandinavia and the US, or if anything is different. So I want to ask you, Jim, what is the main message of your presentation?
Well, for me, it's a provisional. Everything is provisional. We're academics, and as academics or scholars, we have to recognize that it's only what we know and relative to what knowledge we know at this point, and that can change. So I don't want to pronounce any absolutes, but I think the main message was our attempt to look at this surprising gap that still appears in Danish society, despite very abundant social programs. And it left me mystified, and it left many people in Denmark completely mystified. And we've tested it. Look at issues that are relevant to, are the measurements really comparable? Or did we really, measure things in a way that we're stating it? It's not just changing the units and the axes of graphs. But we do find, actually, some substantial inequality in social mobility. And I think it leads to a discussion, which we haven't had yet, I didn't even talk about yet, which is there could be many positive features, and there are, of Danish society. If you look at the happiness measures, Denmark is supposedly the happiest country in the world, right? Or one of them, anyway.
But Norway is
Norway's another one,
yeah.
But the Scandinavian countries are. They provide a level of insurance. They provide a level of well-being, security in health and other aspects. So I'm not denying any of that. What I am only looking at is a very narrow question about how much the children are doing better than the parents. And you could argue there might be even a ceiling effect. And if all the parents are doing extremely well and you can't do any better, then there shouldn't be any mobility. But we know that's not true. And there really is still some room for growth, and it doesn't appear there. Although I forgot to mention today, by the way, that, and Rasmus will talk about it tomorrow, is that even though we find this great relative mobility is quite high, quite low, that absolute mobility is still quite high. There really is a sense that the children are doing better than their parents. It causes me to re-examine some conventional practice. Like, for example, all this work that I've seen on local public goods, it dominates the literature in the United States. Basically saying, parents are forming these tax coalitions, and they're hiring teachers, they're paying salaries, and they're sorting into these neighborhoods as tax districts. Well, all of that's gone in Denmark. It's just gone by fiat, and yet they're still sorting. So it suggests that model is actually obsolete, or at least needs an amendment. And to me, that was surprising. I mean, it wasn't that I was trying to destroy any model. It's just that it maybe suggests more than we thought to date, that this power of sorting maybe is getting even stronger. That the fact that we sort among ourselves, and we keep, this book that was done by Charles Murray, actually, what was it called, Coming Apart? You know the book? It's, Murray is controversial in many areas, but this was a factual statement that the educated and the less educated in the United States are just pulling apart. And we see that in so many different dimensions. There's less of that going on in Scandinavia, but there still seems to be this sorting. I want to really understand it and what it means. And, and do we really want to have busing or like MTO? Chetty's pushing that for the MTO. And so maybe we do, but the fact of the matter is, and Rodrigo Pinto, by the way, shows some really nice effects on MTO. I don't know why those guys won't cite his work, because he actually does show, it's very technical, but he does show positive effects. But not on children, though, on adults. So I find these questions fascinating. I mean, I'm a professional academic. I mean, I like doing research, and I like understanding things. I like it very much. To me, the happiest moment of my life is when I discovered a library. I could read, and I found people who actually were interested in and went to college and realized you could make money. You could actually do a living this way by teaching and researching. So it's personally very satisfying. And I felt I've learned a great deal. All these stereotypes about the welfare state, a lot of negative stereotypes. And people are worried that, maybe we're entering a brave new world. So there's a sense in which we might want to ask just, what is this society doing? If more and more people are sort of getting transfers and providing more public provision, less private motivation, are we destroying some basic features of human society about achievement? That's a question. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, certainly there are plenty of achieving Danes and Scandinavians, so it's not like this has died out, but it may lead to a kind of, it's like Dobzhin and Zilbadi's work. They produce the children to make sure they adapt to the world they live in. If the world they live in doesn't demand that much of them, then the parents won't ask that much of them, and then the kids don't internalize those values. So we don't know how important that is. Nobody talks about it.
No.
I haven't.
No. And the other thing you pointed to, and we have talked about before, is the role of human capital and intergenerational mobility, which is so similar.
There you're dealing with a common humanity. I mean, I think this is very important in the sense of people understanding that these developmental processes are virtually the same around the world.
Yes, I think that's exactly true.
But many people don't accept that. They think, they're different. People in China are different from people in Singapore, Singapore is a bad example, but India or U.S. So it's very bizarre.
But it can be more or less muted,
Yes. Oh, yes. No, they're cultural influence.
So I was thinking, I'm asking you, so about this human capital, the level of education is very similar in the US and the Scandinavian countries.
Yes.
And also, the importance of families' education on their parents, on their children's education. So
I think that's similar.
Yeah, very similar. So could that be, sort of like a limit to, I mean, policies means a lot, but there are limitations to policies. You cannot change everything.
I think that what we're learning now is that family life, when it's been destroyed, when the child doesn't have that kind of reinforcement and support, that is deadly for the development of the child. But when the child gets that, almost in any form, as long as it's kind of personalized and reinforcing and positive, then the kid will benefit. And so he wasn't even studying things like honesty. But it turned out one of the benefits was honesty. But I bet you, I told them to look at a lot of other benefits. I bet you they were also there. That's the kind of thing that public policy tends to ignore. It's usually in the form of, we want to spend so many billions or so many millions and spend so much money on schools. So it's like programmatic in a very rigid way. But what we're getting to understand is the structure of the underlying the nature of how that interaction might change. And that could be a very cost-effective policy. But then it also creates a better understanding of what good, like you're asking, what good policy would be. And that good policy wouldn't necessarily be a Head Start program as much as a parenting program or a mentoring program. The stuff that Raudenbush is doing at the public schools and in the charter school at Chicago. He's taking these disadvantaged black kids, they're almost all black, very disadvantaged. And what he's refusing to do is allow them to fail. And so they get a mentor. And they're asked to hold to the standard, though. It's not like there's social promotion. But what he finds is that and he starts like in age 3, 4, like Perry or Head Start. But what he asks is the kid to be able to perform at that level. And they won't let the kid fail. But they will fail if the kid, but they will just invest in the kid and mentor the kid. And that's what's missing. But what he won't tell me is how costly that is. And that's what I think is the other side of the coin, though. When we look at women and what women as mothers are doing, they're making a huge investment. And they're spending a huge amount of time, but we just don't value it. I mean, that is something that is so out. Kuznets talked about the value of home production. But now what we know about child development, there should be a whole sector. Remember what there was this paper, it was a book, I think, written by Nordhaus and Tobin. Remember?
No.
They were trying to value the non-market benefits.
Oh, yeah.
That was following on Kuza.
Yeah.
That was like in the 70s, I
Yeah.
think. I think an update of that book to put in things like child quality and understanding exactly, but to understand the value of the family. And then we get to the question about saying, what policies can we do to make families more efficient? And that's the part that I think we need to understand.
So let's change topics a little bit. So the way I read your work over the, let's say, the last 20 years, in addition to other things, the focus on children, child development, and understanding the dynamics of human capital formation has been your core interest.
Yes, it has in the last 20
so
years.
what inspired you to start working on that? I mean, you have been working on human capital, for many years before that, but particularly this part.
Well, it's an actual inspiration. I can date it almost to the
Right.
moment. I've been doing a lot of work on evaluating job training programs. I found very discouraging results. The only programs that seemed to work were programs that helped young women, young mothers who had a kid, that had grown up, re-enter the labor force. Those were good. The other programs were disasters. And I kept thinking, well, what are we going to do? We have all these people. But then I realized, wait a minute. We're doing all this stuff in the adult years. So what if we went back to the beginning? And then I started reading up on the literature. And then Jeff Smith, actually, and I were looking into this very closely. And I found out about Perry. I found out about ABC. And so I started reading. And then I got very curious about Perry. So I went to Perry. I talked with him. It took me a long time for them to give me the data. I said, can I have the data? I'd like to reanalyze them. Oh, they mistrusted me. And they were doing all these crazy things. They wouldn't separate it by sex. So the girls and boys were pooled. And they didn't want to look at non-cognitive skills. So then I started saying, what's going on? Then I started realizing there were all these social and emotional skills. But at the time, they weren't considering those, all IQ or achievement tests. And I said, that's crazy too. So I've got a lot of interesting questions. It was it was just kind of like I walked into this and I felt here was a gold mine. And it was, and I still want to really know what's going on. So I figured, can we do something if we start early enough? That was the thought that motivated me, and it still does. And I still think we can. But I'm also convinced that we can do things not just at the early years. I think there's a real opportunity in the teenage years. I think we need to be a little more careful about where in the life cycle these interventions are effective. But there's a lot of work to be done there. But I think if we have a life cycle perspective, that we can really influence policy. It's us. It's about us. So I think we have an enormous chance to understand better what social policy is instead of just treating people. So I think we have a lot of misconceptions about school and what schools do and what teachers can do, and so I find it very exciting. It's personal excitement. Sorry,
I think we are going to wrap up, but one quick question. So if you were going to point to one thing, where you think there is a knowledge gap in this literature, what would you point to? Something that you. I mean, you have all the money in the world, to do this.
Well, I think I could state something very broad, and I could soak up all the money doing it, but it would be something like really understanding the exact mechanisms of human development, and say, for example, understanding what is it about mothering and this intimate mother-child, or really parent-child, but we think it's mother initially anyway. What is it that gives rise to such not only deep feeling, but deep development process? And why is it we need encouragement? Why did we see today in Johannes's talk that it was just having some college student talk to these guys, and yet I can see it. It's the same thing. You're just putting somebody in their lives, you're talking to them, they're mentoring them, and they give them some. I think a lot of people are lonely. It's not just children. I think more deeply, and we've seen that now with this whole business of COVID, that it's interaction. That we interaction. Honestly, I felt I was going to go crazy in the shutdown. Just totally isolated. Zoom is not the same. We just talking to you face to face, looking at expressions, and so. So I really felt, so I do think knowledge of interaction, social interaction, and so it's kind of track the child where the child's at. But that's not at all getting at the interaction. It's just getting at where the mother gets to the child. But it's the process of development we're just beginning to understand. It's amazing too, isn't it? But anyway.
And also brings different fields together.
It does.
Yeah.
That's the other part of it. Okay.
But I like the other one, all the world needs is love.
It's
so,
love. I think, so we should end
let's
it.
stop there.
Put the Beatles song on. All the world needs.